I think that I speak for a lot of people when I say that for me, the spiritual path has had a lot to do with self-improvement, personal growth, transformation, whatever it is that we might call it. But all of these terms that we use, as convenient as they are, I think we shouldn't take them too literally, because they all indicate becoming something, and specifically becoming something other than what we are right now in this moment. And essentially this means that we're resisting this moment and we're resisting who we are. It means that we're not accepting ourselves. And not accepting means that there's judgment, there's condemnation, and in some cases self-loathing. And I know that for me, all of this causes me to feel weak and powerless. And so the struggle to better myself becomes often unachievable. Instead, I tend to wind up feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, frustrated, and defeated. And then I end up beating myself up for it. And I've also noticed that the patterns seem to continue, and I wind up not really changing much at all. So I came to a point where I started to ask myself, if this isn't working, if making an effort to change isn't actually creating any change, then what's the alternative? And I asked myself, what if I simply gave up? What if I just stopped trying? What if I made no effort to change? What if I just let go of the desire to improve and instead just became deeply curious? And this, of course, means, first of all, that we have to begin by accepting ourselves fully as we are, with all of our flaws and imperfections. And then to just simply bring more awareness into everything we think and do, and more particularly toward what we think. To just simply be aware, not interpreting, not judging, but just looking and noticing without any attempt to change anything. I was thinking about how when I was a child, I would often take my toys apart, not with any intention to fix them or even to put them back together, but I was just very curious about how they worked. I wanted to see all the mechanisms behind the motion, and so I would take them apart and I would see how this motor turns this gear and this gear turns that gear and so on, and this turns the wheel. And I was just very curious to understand all of that. And so I came to a place of thinking that what if we have that same kind of curiosity in life? Just wanting to understand how the whole mechanism works, all of the mechanisms behind our emotions and behaviors, all of the underlying thoughts and beliefs, and the whole chain of reactions. So, for example, when we're triggered by something, instead of being in a place of resistance or being reactive, just looking at it and examining it, just to simply understand where it's coming from. And what I observe in my own life is that when I do this with this kind of non-judgment, but with acceptance, just able to observe the process whenever I'm engaged in patterns of thought or behavior which is unhealthy, I can simply look at it without condemning it, but just seeing how it creates a disturbance, how it creates a discomfort or suffering. Just noticing how unnecessary the whole thing is. And then, rather than trying to force it to change, just simply beginning to lose interest in it. And really, that's where it's at. There's no effort in this. There's no struggle. There's no resistance. When we're trying to change ourselves, we're coming from a place of resistance. We're resisting a particular thought or particular behavior. And essentially we're fighting with ourselves. We made ourselves the enemy. And when that's the scenario, you have to ask yourself, who's going to win? Because it's only you. So what I'm suggesting is to just bring awareness to the issue, to the process, and nothing more than this. Just no fighting, no struggling, no conflict, just observing, examining, only with the intention to understand, not to change, not to fix, not to improve. And again, this requires acceptance and compassion and forgiveness. Because ultimately we're learning to love ourselves just as we are, with all of the flaws and imperfections. And that's what love means. Not that there should be any certain conditions or criteria. Love means complete acceptance. The whole thing, flaws and all. And I've noticed in my own life that I can be really hard on myself just for having flaws. But I have to remember that no one is perfect. So why am I trying so hard to be perfect? Why place all of that expectation upon myself? You know, we all have so many imperfections. We all make mistakes. We all fall short sometimes. We all get caught up in unhealthy patterns of thought and behavior. But to just accept all of this with compassion and forgiveness. And forgiveness just means that there's no condemnation. It doesn't mean that we're ignoring anything. It just means that we accept the flaws and that we love ourselves despite that those flaws are there. So what I'm suggesting is to approach the whole thing with love and acceptance and just be deeply curious. So if I'm behaving in a way that I know is unhealthy or is causing me to suffer, by condemning myself, what happens is that I bring about more suffering on top of the suffering that I'm already suffering. And that doesn't really help me. So instead, I learned that I can just look at it. I can see how it's causing me to suffer without having to be hard on myself, without making an effort to change it, and without having to create more unnecessary suffering. So just looking, just examining and seeing all of the functions from beginning to end, going through all of the chain of reactions from the root to the surface. And really, it's about going to the root of of my feelings and my beliefs and seeing how they arise and how they express themselves. And when I accept myself, I'm able to really look at myself with clarity, because when there's judgment, we don't like to look, or when we do look, we tend to filter a lot of things out. We don't see the whole picture, or we try to turn away and not look at all. But with acceptance, you can look even while these patterns are arising, and you can see with clarity what's happening as it's occurring. So instead of being suddenly caught in a storm of emotions and not knowing how you got there or how to navigate out of it, you can watch the storm as it arises, step by step, and understand it. And so you know exactly how you got there, and you're able then to retrace your steps. When you have this kind of clarity in regard to how these functions play out, then there's a choice to engage or not to engage. If I see how something is not serving my highest good and is actually causing me to suffer, and I really understand that, I can simply choose not to engage with it. And again, this is not about resisting it. It's about simply being disinterested. And there's a big difference between resisting and being disinterested, because effort requires a struggle where disinterest doesn't. Disinterest just means I don't feel the impulse to engage or resist, because both of these require an effort. But disinterest has nothing at all to do with effort. So this is what I'm suggesting, this is what I'm coming to, is that just bringing awareness into everything, just observing and understanding, and then change tends to occur naturally on its own, without any effort, without any struggle, and without any resistance.